Whilst the sector sleeps, something historic awakens. Also, the idea these places were safe. They have been incorrect. The sand recalls. The healing employee first observed the blood seeping up through the Colosseum's floor for the duration of the pre-sunrise hours of a July morning. Now not fresh blood. This become antique, dark, the color of rust and dried centuries. However, it became moist, spreading across the current reconstruction of the area ground in styles that seemed almost planned. "Cristo," muttered Paolo Viri, backing far away from the spreading stain. He'd been running protection on the Colosseum for 15 years and had never visible something like this. He grabbed his radio. "Supervisor, we have a problem. There may be liquid developing through the arena ground. Looks as if... I do not know what it seems like." By the point his manager arrived 20 minutes later, the stain had unfolded to cover almost 1/4 of the arena, kind of 900 rectangular meters of dark, wet substance that evaluation could later verify became human blood combined with sand. Ancient blood. Blood that must were absorbed, degraded, erased by using 1,000 years of weather and time. But the sand remembered. Dr. Giulia Marchetti changed into called in because the lead archaeologist to analyze the phenomenon. A consultant in Roman structure and the macabre records of gladiatorial games, she'd posted extensively on the Colosseum's role as an area of mass dying. But nothing in her research had prepared her for this. "The sand is saturated at the molecular level," explained the forensic scientist who tested the substance. "Carbon dating suggests the blood is approximately 1,800 years antique, from the late imperial duration. However, it's no longer just residue, it is focused, as if every drop spilled right here over 4 centuries has one way or the other been preserved inside the substrate and is now returning." "Getting back from where?" Giulia requested. "Blood doesn't simply reappear after 2 millennia. That's what I'm trying to understand. The attention is impossible. Based totally on historical records, we estimate roughly 400,000 human beings died inside the Colosseum in the course of its energetic period. Even supposing we assume a mean of 5 liters of blood consistent with individual, spread across the area's surface, weathered by way of rain and sun, it must have degraded completely inside decades. Rather, we are detecting blood equal to thousands of deaths focused in an unmarried region." Giulia knelt beside the stain, cautious not to touch it. The sand underneath the blood becomes shifting, now not flowing like liquid, but transferring with practical movement, grains rearranging themselves into patterns. She photographed them, then as compared the pictures to ancient records of arena layout. The patterns matched seats. The blood-soaked sand become arranging itself to mirror the Colosseum's seating shape, developing a map of where spectators had sat, marking their positions with the blood they'd watched being spilled. "It is a report," she breathed. "The sand absorbed the entirety that occurred here, each demise, each wound, each drop of blood, and it's recreating it, showing us what came about." "Why now?" her assistant Marco asked. "If it has been conserving this facts for 2,000 years, why manifest now?" Earlier than Giulia ought to solution, the blood patterns shifted once more. The seating arrangement dissolved, changed by using new formations, figures. Human shapes rendered in blood and sand, placed throughout the area ground in poses of fight, demise, and terror. Gladiators, criminals, Christians, all the Colosseum's victims rendered in the substance in their very own deaths. "It is telling a story," Giulia said, "or warning us, or..." She paused, seeing more figures forming at the area's edges. "Calling them returned." The figures were not simply representations anymore. They have been becoming 3-dimensional, blood and sand constructing crude approximations of our bodies, status upright, moving with jerky, puppet-like motions. The sand was the usage of the blood as medium, constructing sculptures of all people who died right here, bringing them again inside the most effective form it could, transient buildings made from the substances in their deaths. "We need to evacuate," Marco stated, backing closer to the go-out. "This is past archaeology, that is." One of the blood-sonned figures lunged at him with surprising speed. Marco fell, screaming because the determined touched him, and wherein it made contact, his pores and skin blistered and darkened, as if the historic blood changed into looking to take in him, to feature his death to the gathering the sand have been building for centuries. Giulia dragged Marco away, pulled him closer to the Hypogeum front, the underground tunnels wherein gladiators had waited. However, more figures were growing now, dozens of them, the area floor remodeling right into a graveyard that became actively resurrecting its dead. They fled into the tunnels, Marco clutching his burned arm, the pores and skin already displaying signs of infection that spread too quickly to be natural. Behind them, the blood-sonned figures accompanied, dragging themselves through slim passages with determination that cautioned recognition, cause, starvation. "What do they need?" Marco gasped. "The sand recalls loss of life," Giulia stated, leading him deeper into the Hypogeum's maze. "It absorbed 4 centuries of demise, ache, terror. Now it's manifesting that memory, and I assume it wants enterprise, desires to make new deaths to feature to its series." They emerged in a chamber Giulia did not apprehend from the same old tunnel maps. The partitions have been older than the encircling structure, the masonry predating the Colosseum by means of centuries. And carved into every surface had been symbols, not Roman, not Latin, but something older. Etruscan caution symptoms, or possibly earlier. This space existed before the Colosseum, she found out. The Romans constructed over it. However something became right here, anything made this vicinity massive, they knew. They knew the floor turned into dangerous, and they built an amphitheater for mass death at once on pinnacle of it, intentionally. Marco became getting worse, his arm turning black, the contamination spreading closer to his shoulder. Why might they do this? To feed it, to meet it. The floor here desired death, craved it. The Etruscans identified that and marked it as forbidden, but the Romans determined to apply it, to provide the hungry earth exactly what it desired, 4 centuries of blood and death and spectacle. They made the Colosseum now not regardless of the ground's hunger, however, because of it. The blood-sonned figures had been entering the chamber now, surrounding them, but they stopped at the threshold, as if a few ancient boundary averted them from crossing. The Etruscan warnings glowed faintly inside the darkness, wards that also maintained strength after millennia. "The protection best works in here," Giulia stated. "The instant we go away this chamber, the one's matters will take us. And some things happening up there," she gestured closer to the area above, "will spread. The sand will hold manifesting deaths, hold building figures, till it's recreated every kill that befell here. 400,000 murders replayed in blood and sand. How do we prevent it?" Giulia studied the Etruscan symbols, translating the archaic script. The warnings told a story. The floor underneath the Colosseum became a skinny location, a location wherein the boundary between the dwelling international and the realm of death grew susceptible. The historical peoples had diagnosed this, had prevented constructing right here, had marked it as risky. However, while Rome needed area for their grandest area, they had unnoticed the warnings. The architects had recognized, some of them as a minimum, that they had constructed the Hypogeum's mystery chambers, had carved their personal warnings in Latin below the Etruscan originals. "The floor hungers. It should be fed or it'll feed itself." For 4 centuries, the games had fed it. Lots of deaths annually, blood soaking into sand that absorbed all of it, storing the memories of loss of life, building a massive reservoir of mortality. However, when the games ended, whilst Christianity closed the arena and no more blood flowed, the ground remained hungry. It were ready, building pressure, absorbing every unintentional death, every homicide that passed off near the Colosseum, every tourist who died of coronary heart attacks or injuries within the centuries, considering the fact that By no means sufficient to satisfy, but sufficient to hold the reservoir growing. Now something had brought on the release. Perhaps construction paintings had damaged a ward. Perhaps the amassed demise had finally reached important mass. But the sand turned into manifesting its recollections, was recreating every kill, changed into trying to fill the present with the beyond's violence. There may be best one way to prevent it, Giulia said, her voice whole as she understood what the Etruscan symbols have been telling her. The floor needs to be fed, wishes death, wishes blood. However, not the old blood, it really is contaminated, saturated with too much loss of life. It desires fresh dying. Willing sacrifice to shut the cycle, to seal the boundary, to place the sand's reminiscences again to sleep. You are pronouncing someone has to die to forestall this. Marco looked at his blackened arm. Someone like me, already inflamed, already dying from the antique blood's contact. I'm announcing someone has to feed the ground nicely, voluntarily, with expertise of what they're doing. The Romans knew this. It's why gladiators were occasionally volunteers, why condemned criminals were given the option to combat. Now not mercy, utility. The floor desired inclined deaths to compelled ones, absorbed them greater successfully. Marco stood with attempt, his inflamed arm putting vein. Then I volunteer, I'm already dying from this. Might as well make it significant. Marco, no. We will locate some other manner. Can we? You examine the warnings. 400,000 deaths manifesting in the area above us. What number of humans will die if the one's matters escape the Colosseum? How many may be inflamed like me? Someone has to feed the ground, and I'm already halfway there. Giulia desired to argue, to discover some other solution. However, the blood-sonned figures were urgent closer, testing the ward's obstacles. Time became going for walks out. They ascended via the tunnels, Marco leading, Giulia following with recordings of the Etruscan rituals. The arena ground had transformed absolutely. The entire surface became now blood-soaked sand populated by using heaps of figures, all of the Colosseum's lifeless recreated in gruesome approximation, all shifting with that equal jerky puppet movement, all hungry for brand spanking new deaths to add to the ancient collection. The middle, Giulia said, studying the ritual commands. The sacrifice has to arise at the arena's genuine center, where the focus of interest changed into strongest, wherein most blood becomes spilled, wherein the boundary among demise and life is thinnest. They fought via the blood-sonned figures, Marco the use of his infected arm as weapon. Wherein it touched the constructions, they dissolved, recognizing their personal substance. He carved a path to the area's center, Giulia close at the back of, each of them understanding this become one-manner adventure. On the center factor, marked through a melancholy within the sand, where the trapdoors had once lifted beasts into the area, Marco stopped. The blood-sonned figures surrounded them, however, did not attack, as if they understood what become approximately to appear. Inform them I used to be a great assistant, Marco stated with a vulnerable smile. Inform them I died doing archaeology's paintings, information the past even when the past changed into trying to kill us. Giulia couldn't communicate. Ought to best hand him the blade they'd located within the hypogeum, a bronze gladiator's sword, historical and ceremonial, best for the ritual. Marco took it, placed it over his coronary heart, spoke the words Giulia had translated from the Etruscan warnings. I give myself willingly. I feed the hungry earth. I close the cycle. I seal the boundary. Permit my death be enough. Permit the memories sleep another time. He drove the blade home. The impact changed into instantaneous. The blood-sonned figures collapsed, losing brotherly love, returning to the inert cloth they'd been formed from. The blood that had seeped up through the ground flowed backward, draining into the sand, disappearing as if it had in no way been. Marco's frame sank into the area floor, absorbed absolutely, added to the substantial reservoir of death that the floor have been amassing for 2 millennia. And Giulia turned into on my own in an arena that appeared every day once more, simply sand and stone, and the morning solar beginning to remove darkness from the historic partitions. Emergency responders located her 3 hours later, sitting on the area's center, observing not anything. She instructed them she'd been investigating the blood phenomenon with her assistant, that there'd been a structural fall apart inside the hypogeum, that Marco had been killed by falling stones. They believed her because the alternative, blood rising from the arena ground, the useless recreating themselves in sand, a voluntary sacrifice to satisfy the floor's starvation, changed into too insane to accept. The blood stains were long gone. Chemical evaluation showed nothing uncommon inside the area sand. The best proof became Giulia's recordings, her pics, her notes approximately Etruscan warnings and historical hungers. She saved them private, posted not anything, said not anything. Who would trust her? But she lowered back to the Colosseum each day, running on reliable recuperation initiatives even as privately monitoring the ground, checking for signs and symptoms that the starvation become returning, that Marco's sacrifice had been inadequate, that the collected deaths of 4 centuries had been stirring once more. Every now and then, past due at night time whilst the website online turned into closed, she stood at the arena's center and felt the floor pulsing beneath her toes. Not with malevolence, with delight. The starvation became sated, the boundary sealed, the recollections dawsing. Marco had fed it nicely, had closed the cycle, had given it what it wished. However, Giulia knew it would not closing all the time. The ground's hunger was eternal. In any other century, another millennium, the stress might build again. The sand could keep in mind all of the deaths it had absorbed. The blood might upward thrust another time. And someone else could want to discover the Etruscan warnings, recognize the ancient hunger, locate someone willing to feed it before it fed itself. The Colosseum stood over Rome, monument to glory and loss of life, hiding its mystery. The sand remembered the whole thing, every gladiator's final breath, each criminal's scream, each Christian's prayer, each beast's roar. All of it saved within the substrate, absorbed with the aid of floor that hungered, preserved in cloth that never surely forgot. And underneath all of it, Marco slept with the opposite volunteers, those who'd understood what the Colosseum clearly was, what reason it definitely served. No longer entertainment, no longer spectacle, but feeding, pleasing the ground's everlasting hunger with enough inclined death to hold it from taking unwilling victims. Giulia saved watch over the sleeping hunger, maintained the boundary, ensured Marco's sacrifice wasn't wasted. It became the least she could do for the assistant who'd understood what the sand remembered and had been brave enough to become a part of that memory himself. The sand remembered dying. Now it remembered Marco dying willingly, including his sacrifice to the historical collection, sealing the cycle one extra time. And Giulia remembered looking, understanding, and carrying the load of expertise, that the floor beneath Rome's finest monument would always starvation, would continually want feeding, might always require a person brave enough to apprehend and generous sufficient to present themselves to keep all of us else secure. The sand remembered, and now so did she. The gladiators echo. Thomas Blackwood failed to consider in ghosts till he killed one inside the Colosseum's underground chambers. He became a protection shield at the night shift, making his rounds through the hypogeum at 2:30 a.m. when he encountered a man in gladiatorial armor standing on the stop of a tunnel that useless ended 30 meters in advance. "Sir, the Colosseum is closed," Thomas called out in English, then repeated in damaged Italian. "You want to depart, now." The gladiator became. His face become wrong, too symmetrical, too perfect, like a statue given flesh, however not quite achieving humanity. When he spoke, his voice echoed from multiple instructions concurrently, as though the stone partitions had been talking via him. I cannot go away. I've never left. I died right here 1700 years in the past, and my death has been repeating every night time considering the fact that. But this night, something is different. Tonight, I'm able to engage. This night, I might eventually escape. Thomas reached for his radio, but the gladiator moved with impossible pace, crossing 30 meters in an unmarried stride, his hand, bloodless as marble, gripping Thomas's wrist. Wherein they touched, Thomas felt it, memories flooding into his thoughts, the gladiator's recollections. His call have been Marcus. He'd been a Thracian slave sold to a ludus in Capua, educated to fight inside the arena. He'd survived 12 bouts before the 13th, rigged in shape against 3 fighters simultaneously, amusement for an emperor's birthday. He'd recognized he was going to die. They had all acknowledged. The script had been written before that they had entered the area. However, Marcus had refused to follow the script, had fought more difficult than predicted, killed one opponent, wounded any other, survived lengthy enough that the crowd started cheering for him, notwithstanding the emperor's clear preference for his death. And in that moment of collective will, 50,000 voices traumatic his survival, something had changed. The emperor had been pressured to furnish mercy, to let Marcus live, to acknowledge that the gangs will superseded even imperial authority. Marcus had lived every other 7 years after that day, had received his freedom, his wood sword marking him as retired. But a part of him had remained in the arena, trapped in that moment whilst he defied dying and the group had saved him. That echo of will and survival had imprinted on the stone, developing a ghost, no longer of his loss of life, but of his refusal to die. For 17 centuries, I have repeated that second, Marcus said, liberating Thomas's wrist. Each night time I combat the same warfare. Each night the gang saves me. Each night I survive but remain trapped. The echo cannot cease because it's built on survival, no longer loss of life. I want to die well to subsequently be unfastened. Thomas subsidized away, his rational mind fracturing below the load of not possible experience. I can't assist you. I don't know the way to kill a ghost. I don't even trust in ghosts. You have already got the method. Marcus pointed to the security baton at Thomas's belt. Not the weapon itself, the desire at the back of it. My echo become created by way of collective will, by using 50,000 humans traumatic I continue to exist. It is able to best be ended by using planned will to give up it. You should pick out to strike me, pick out to kill me. Make that choice in reality, and the echo will sooner or later damage. It truly is insane. You are now not actual. That is stress or carbon monoxide within the tunnels, or... Then humor your delusion. Strike me. If I'm no longer actual, your baton will skip through air and nothing will change. But if I am actual, if I am without a doubt trapped in an echo of survival it's lasted 17 centuries, you may unfasten me. What do you have to lose? Thomas looked at the gladiator's face, historic and earnest, weary with centuries of repetition, determined for ending. Towards each instinct of his rational mind, he drew his baton. I am doing this to prove you're now not actual. Then prove it. Thomas swung. The baton linked with Marcus's temple, no longer with the resistance of flesh, however, with something else, something that shattered like glass. The gladiator's form exploded into fragments, now not of body but of mild, of memory, of gathered echoes breaking apart and dissipating. And in that second of shattering, Thomas felt every different echo within the Colosseum awaken. There were thousands of them. Every gladiator who'd refused to die consistent with script. Every fighter who'd survived towards not possible odds. Every warrior whose will to stay have been so robust that it had printed on the stone growing echoes that have been repeating for centuries. All of them have been dozing, unconscious, trapped of their loops. However, Marcus's shattering had awakened them, proven them that escape became possible. And all of them wanted to be freed. Thomas ran as the hypogeum filled with gladiators rising from the walls, all of them historic echoes made visible, all of them accomplishing in the direction of him with determined desire. They could not free themselves. The echo should only be broken from outside, by means of a person living, by way of a person who selected intentionally to cease it. He burst out of the underground chambers into the arena, but the gladiators accompanied, dozens of them, then masses, and that they weren't alone. Other echoes have been manifesting, no longer combatants, however, victims. Criminals who'd been carried out, Christians fed to beasts, prisoners who died in elaborate reenactments of mythological deaths. They all trapped in loops in their very own demise, they all aware now that breakout might be feasible. However, those echoes were one of a kind from Marcus. They had been constructed on dying, now not survival, and that they didn't want to be freed. They desired to finish their loops, to finish demise nicely. However, they could not die without a person to kill them, without a target market to witness, without the spectacle being finished efficaciously. They desired Thomas to play his component, to be the executioner, to kill them so they may eventually end demise and escape their loops. "No," Thomas said, backing towards the area wall. "I'm not killing absolutely everyone. I'm no longer." A tiger echo emerged from the hypogeum entrance. Not an actual tiger, however, the memory of one. Every tiger that had killed within the area compressed right into a single form. It moved with liquid grace closer to the criminal echoes, ready to complete their deaths. However, it could not have interaction with them. Echo couldn't kill echo. Best the reciting may want to affect the useless. Thomas's radio crackled, other security guards responding to alerts, heading towards the arena. If they arrived and noticed this, if the echoes touched them the way Marcus had touched Thomas, that they had been infected with the memories too, could be conscripted into helping smash the loops. He had to incorporate this, needed to prevent the awakening from spreading. But how did you combat echoes? How did you position memories lower back to sleep? The answer came from a surprising source. Many of the gladiator echoes, one stood out, now not due to the fact he become distinctive, however, because he was familiar. Thomas recognized him from the memories he'd absorbed from Marcus. This had been his very last opponent, the fighter he'd been scripted to lose in opposition to. In contrast to Marcus, this gladiator's echo had followed the script. He'd killed Marcus's teammate, wounded Marcus himself, performed his position perfectly. His echo become constructed on success, on following the narrative, on performing his loss of life effectively whilst the time got here. He wasn't desperately searching for getaway. He become proud of his performance, content in his loop. "You could assist me," Thomas stated to this gladiator. "You know how the spectacles were speculated to work. Help me place them again to sleep. Help me redo the scripts they're trapped in." The gladiator echo nodded. The arena calls for performance. The echoes cannot relaxation due to the fact their narratives had been interrupted, via survival whilst death becomes scripted, by means of messy deaths while easy ones were expected, by crowds interfering with imperial will. They need crowning glory. Someone ought to carry out the missing scenes. "I cannot kill hundreds of ghosts." "You do not must kill them. You have to witness them. That's what they want, and target audience that sees their deaths well, acknowledges their courage or suffering, completes the story." The Colosseum changed into constantly approximately witnessing. The echoes are trapped due to the fact no person has witnessed their complete memories in 17 centuries. Thomas understood. The vacationers who visited the Colosseum saw ruins, took photographs, discovered sanitized history. But they did not witness the deaths, didn't see the actual moments of loss of life, didn't complete the spectacles that had created these echoes. The testimonies have been unfinished, the narratives incomplete. "Inform me what to do," Thomas said. The gladiator echo prepared the others, arranged them in the area in keeping with their unique positions, recreated the matches and executions and beast hunts. And Thomas watched, bore witness, noticed every demise performed out in echo, each tale completed, each narrative reaching its proper end. It took hours. The crook echoes have been carried out again, Thomas witnessing every technique, crucifixion, burning, animal mauling. The gladiator echoes fought their matches to final touch, Thomas seeing every wound, each fall, each final breath. The Christian echoes died for their faith, Thomas acknowledging their courage. The prisoner echoes perished in their mythological reenactments, Thomas information the cruelty in their enjoyment deaths. By sunrise, most of the echoes had dissolved. Witnessed well, their loops had finished, allowing them to subsequently flow directly to something got hereafter. However, a few remained, the most powerful wills, the most stressful deaths, the most dramatically interrupted narratives. Marcus reappeared among them, his echo reconstituting itself. "I advised you I died 17 centuries in the past. That changed into reality. However, I also informed you my echo turned into built on survival. That become incomplete fact. My echo survived because I was ashamed." Ashamed of what? Of living whilst my accomplice died. Of accepting freedom whilst I'd been part of a machine that enslaved heaps. Of retiring without difficulty while others fought and died. That shame created a second echo, no longer of my survival, however, of my guilt. And guilt can't be witnessed away. It can handiest be acknowledged by way of the guilty. Marcus knelt inside the arena sand. I survived, and that I permit that survival erase my complicity. I told myself I had no choice, that I was slave and victim. But I killed 12 guys earlier than my final fit. 12 people who would possibly have deserved to live as a good deal as I did. My echo cannot rest because I by no means faced that reality. Thomas failed to realize what to say. How did you absolve historic guilt? How did you assist a ghost forgive himself? The solution got here from the other final echoes. They gathered around Marcus, all the victims, the achieved, the murdered, and that they spoke in unison. "We forgive you. You had been a part of a gadget that destroyed us all. You survived it. We did no longer. However, your survival become no longer theft from us. Your life did no longer require our deaths. The Empire demanded both. The guilt is Rome's, now not yours." Marcus's echo commenced to dissolve, but otherwise this time, not shattering like glass, however fading like mist, peacefully, gratefully. "Thank you," he stated to the sufferer's echoes. "Thanks for seeing what I could not see myself." Then he become long past, without a doubt long gone, not repeating, now not trapped, however released. The other echoes followed, separately, as sunrise completely broke over the Colosseum. The victims dissolved, their suffering witnessed and stated. The gladiators faded, their courage visible and honored. By the time Thomas's fellow guards arrived for shift alternate, the arena was empty of all, however, morning light and historical stone. "Thomas, what are you doing out here?" his manager asked. "Your shift ended an hour ago." "Simply completing my rounds." Thomas checked out the area ground, on the sand that had absorbed such a lot of deaths, that had held their echoes for such a lot of centuries, ensuring everything's at ease. Over the following weeks, Thomas again each night time to the hypogeum, checking for brand new echoes, for testimonies that needed witnessing. He determined a few stubborn loops that required more than one viewings to finish, traumatic deaths that wished affected person acknowledgement, guilt that wanted cautious absolution. He discovered that the Colosseum wasn't simply conserving echoes of death. It became keeping unfinished stories, incomplete narratives, recollections that could not relaxation due to the fact no one had witnessed them properly, had visible them absolutely, had stated each the braveness and the horror, the survival and the guilt, the spectacle and the humanity beneath it. And he discovered that bearing witness turned into its personal type of work, its personal form of duty. Someone needed to see the echoes, to complete their memories, to permit them sooner or later to rest after centuries of repetition. Thomas became that a person. The night protect who watched no longer just the physical shape, but the memories it contained. The witness who noticed what vacationers couldn't see, who recounted deaths that history had reduced to numbers, who honored echoes that have been repeating in darkness for 17 centuries. On occasion, he encountered traffic who should see the echoes too, touchy souls who perceived the gladiators in the hypogeum, who heard the roaring of phantom crowds, who sensed the load of all of the deaths that had passed off here. Thomas could manual them, give an explanation for what they have been experiencing, assist them take into account that bearing witness was the way you freed the trapped, how you finished unfinished stories, the way you allowed the beyond to ultimately grow to be beyond instead of everlasting gift. The Colosseum stood above Rome, monument to glory and cruelty, containing heaps of tales that vacationers could by no means see. However, Thomas saw them, witnessed them, finished them one echo at a time. And slowly, night time via night, death through loss of life, tale by tale, the Colosseum became emptying of its ghosts. The echoes have been being freed, the loops have been breaking, the unfinished narratives had been accomplishing their conclusions. Marcus were the primary. However, he would not be the closing. There were heaps greater, gladiators who'd survived or died in ways that left echoes, victims whose deaths had been so annoying their memories could not relaxation, warring parties whose guilt or disgrace or braveness had printed on the stone so deeply that 17 centuries hadn't erased them. And Thomas might witness all of them, might see each loss of life, honor each courage, acknowledge every guilt. Will be the target market the Colosseum had wanted all alongside, not the cheering masses disturbing blood, but an unmarried witness who understood that each echo turned into someone, each loop become a tragedy, each unfinished story deserved final touch. The paintings could take years, perhaps a long time, perhaps the rest of his lifestyles, but Thomas had observed his cause in the darkness below Rome's finest monument. He became the witness, the story completer, the echo breaker. And each night, as he descended into the hypogeum to peer what recollections had been ready, he concept of Marcus, the gladiator who'd survived while he changed into imagined to die, who'd carried that survival as guilt for 17 centuries, who'd eventually been freed by means of forgiveness from those he'd notion he'd betrayed. "I witness you," Thomas would say to each new echo he encountered. "I see your story. I renowned your demise. You may relaxation now. You may in the end relaxation." And separately, the echoes did. The everlasting target market. Dr. Isabella Rossi located the anomaly for the duration of a routine acoustic survey of the Colosseum's underground chambers. Her device turned into measuring how sound propagated through the hypogeum, the community of tunnels underneath the area floor, wherein gladiators and beasts had waited for his or her deaths. However, the readings made no experience. Sound became echoing back from empty area, reverberating off surfaces that should not exist. "Marco, take a look at the calibration," she said to her assistant. "I'm getting reflections from the middle of the area, however there's not anything there, just air." Marco reviewed the facts on his pill, frowning. "Devices functioning generally. However, you're proper. We're detecting acoustic reflections steady with a strong object approximately 50 meters in diameter, suspended 3 meters above the arena floor. Besides, there is nothing there. Run a complete spectrum test. Infrared, ultraviolet, the whole thing. I need to recognize what's growing those echoes. The elevated test found out something impossible. The empty air above the area's middle become denser than it have to be. Now not bodily, atmospheric pressure become regular, but informationally. The distance contained patterns, systems, companies of something that their gadgets could not at once measure, but may want to come across the effects of. It is like there is an invisible structure, Marco said, analyzing the information. Fabricated from something that does not have interaction with mild or remember in regular methods, but influences sound, creates acoustic shadows, has a few type of density. Isabella notion about the Colosseum's records. 50,000 spectators packed into the stands, watching gladiatorial fight, beast hunts, executions. Tens of millions of humans over 4 centuries, all centered on the identical space, the same spectacle of dying and survival. All that interest, all that emotion, all that concentrated human attention targeted on one pretty small location. What if awareness has weight? She asked. What if attention, focused intensely enough over long enough durations, can create structures, not physical systems, however, informational ones, patterns in space itself, prepared through collective consciousness? That is now not technological know-how, Isabella. It really is mysticism. Is it? Quantum mechanics says statement impacts reality. What if observation, sustained for centuries via hundreds of thousands of human beings, impacts it permanently? What if the Colosseum's area is imprinted with the form of collective attention, and that imprint persists even after the observers are long gone? Marco seemed skeptical, but Isabella changed into already planning comply with up research. Over the subsequent 3 weeks, they mapped the invisible shape in element. It changed into precisely circular, matching the original area diameter. It rose in tiers, mirroring the audience seating that had surrounded it. And maximum disturbingly, it changed into occupied. The occupied zones showed up as dense clusters in their acoustic mapping, concentrations of the strange informational substance that filled the invisible shape. When Isabella overlaid ancient information of seating capacity and association, the clusters matched perfectly. 50,000 factors of density, arranged exactly as 50,000 spectators would have been organized. There are human beings in there, she breathed, or something formed like people, manufactured from attention and commentary rather than flesh and bone. Ghosts of the target audience, nonetheless watching, nonetheless centered at the arena center in which the spectacles befell. It's impossible. So is acoustic mirrored image from empty air, however we are detecting it, Isabella decided. I am going into the arena, at night while the website is closed. I need to experience this without delay, not just through units. Isabella, it truly is risky. We do not know what that is. That's why I want to investigate. The medical technique calls for direct observation. She again that night, by myself, sporting minimum device, only a flashlight and a handheld acoustic sensor. The Colosseum in the dark changed into sizable and silent, moonlight streaming via the broken arches, casting shadows throughout 2,000 years of weathered stone. Isabella walked to the area's center, to the space her devices had recognized as the focal point, and she or he felt it without delay, stress. No longer bodily strain, however, something else, an experience of being watched with the aid of hundreds of eyes, discovered with the depth of spectators looking ahead to the show to begin. She grew to become slowly, scanning the empty ruins. The stands were vacant for 1,500 years. However, the stress of commentary didn't diminish. If something, it intensified, as if her presence inside the arena had activated something, had brought on popularity from the invisible target market. Howdy, she referred to as out, feeling silly. I realize you are there. I'm able to feel you looking. I realize you've been looking for centuries. However, the video games are over. The spectacles ended. Why are you still right here? The stress shifted, and Isabella ought to see them. Not together with her eyes. Her visual cortex insisted the stands remained empty, but with anything feel registered their informational presence. 50,000 figures occupying the invisible shape, translucent and incorrect, carrying apparel from across the centuries of the Colosseum's lively use. Romans in togas, medieval nobles, Renaissance traders, they all frozen in poses of anticipation, all centered on the gap in which Isabella stood. And they have been expecting something, expecting the spectacle to begin, waiting for blood. Isabella ran. She fled the area, scrambled up the damaged steps, burst out of the Colosseum into the Roman night. However, even outside, blocks far from the shape, she ought to nonetheless experience them looking, their collective attention by some means tethered to her now that she'd perceived them. She didn't sleep that night. On every occasion she closed her eyes, she saw them, the eternal target audience, frozen in their invisible theater, waiting for amusement that could never come. Besides, it had come as soon as, for 400 years, the Colosseum had fed them spectacle after spectacle. Gladiators fighting to the demise. Criminals torn apart by means of beasts. Prisoners carried out in intricate reenactments of mythological scenes. The target audience had watched it all, and their watching had imprinted itself on space, growing a permanent document, a ghost theater that continued long after the bodily audience had died. However, what did ghosts of interest need? What could fulfill an target audience that were ready 15 centuries for the display to renew? Isabella's smartphone rang at 3 a.m. It became Marco, his voice tight with fear. Turn on the news, any channel, you need to look this. She found a 24-hour news station displaying live pictures from the Colosseum. The ancient monument became sparkling, no longer with outside lighting, but from within, a faded luminescence emanating from the arena itself. And those had been gathering. Loads of them, then hundreds, strolling through Rome's night streets towards the Colosseum as though summoned. What's going on? Isabella requested, though she already suspected. The audience is calling for more spectators. The invisible structure you detected, it's becoming visible, and it is drawing human beings in. Isabella grabbed her system and ran. The Colosseum became chaos while she arrived, crowds pressing in the direction of the entrances notwithstanding police obstacles, human beings climbing the ancient partitions, all of them with the equal clean expression, transferring with the mechanical precision of folks who weren't fully controlling their own actions. She fought via the crowd, the usage of her studies credentials to get right of entry to the constrained regions, descended into the hypogeum tunnels that led underneath the area. From underneath, she may want to see the invisible shape manifesting, not turning into physical but becoming perceptible, its informational substance accomplishing enough density that human senses could in the end hit upon it at once. The eternal target market turned into uninterested in being invisible, tired of looking an empty area. They wanted the games to renew, wanted new spectacles to examine, desired to experience again the joys that they had experienced while the Colosseum was lively and blood soaked into the sand every day. And they have been summoning members. The blank-eyed humans crowding into the shape were not tourists anymore. They were turning into the new target market, their awareness merging with the eternal observers, adding their attention to the weight of collective consciousness that had existed right here for 2 millennia. However, audiences wished something to watch, and as Isabella emerged onto the area floor, she noticed what they had been making ready. The sand became converting, turning into darker, wetter, regardless of no water being brought. It became remembering its authentic nation, soaked with blood from heaps of deaths, stained with the evidence of spectacle. And in the tunnels at the back of her, she heard sounds that shouldn't exist. Roaring, snarling, the clash of weapons. The eternal target audience wasn't simply summoning observers, it became summoning the spectacle itself. Recreating the games from collective reminiscence, manifesting gladiators and beasts from the informational substance that stuffed this space. "This has to forestall," Isabella stated to the empty air, to the eternal target audience she knew become looking. "The video games are over. You can't simply restart them due to the fact you're bored." The stress of interest shifted, and she or he heard a response, now not in words but in natural, which means transmitted immediately to her cognizance. The target market did not care about morality or cutting-edge ethics. It cared about spectacle, approximately leisure, about the thrill of looking existence and dying contests. It had been created by using 4 centuries of such watching, had been given form and staying power via the collective attention of hundreds of thousands. Asking it to stop looking, forestall trying spectacle, became like asking fireplace to stop burning or water to prevent flowing. "Then I will come up with something to look at," Isabella stated, creating a determined decision. "Not deaths, now not blood sports, something else. Something that satisfies the need for spectacle without killing anyone." She pulled out her telephone, referred to as Marco. "I need you to do something crazy. Get each projector you can find, each light source, every piece of audio gadget. Bring them to the Colosseum. We are going to place on a show." Over the subsequent frantic hours, they worked. Marco recruited different researchers, technicians from movie and theater packages, anybody with enjoy developing spectacle. They installation projectors across the arena, established speakers at the historic walls, created a multimedia presentation using the Colosseum itself because the degree. They confirmed battles, not real ones, however, historical reenactments, CGI reconstructions, pictures from movies about gladiators and historical Rome. They showed beasts, documentaries about lions and tigers, nature photos of apex predators, virtual recreations of extinct animals. They showed executions, now not real deaths but theatrical performances, opera, ballet, modern-day interpretations of classical myths. It became spectacle without dying, leisure without real violence. A show designed to meet the eternal target market's want for stimulus at the same time as stopping them from manifesting actual gladiators and actual beasts to tear apart actual humans. And enormously, it worked. The eternal target market watched, their collective attention focusing on the projections, absorbing the spectacle Isabella's crew provided. The clean-eyed crowd stopped pressing inward, frozen in place as they too watched, their cognizance briefly happy with the aid of the vicarious revel in a violence without its truth. But Isabella knew it become transient. The projections might quit, the device might fail, and the everlasting target audience might grow to be stressed again, might call for real spectacle, real blood, actual loss of life to watch. "We want an everlasting solution," she instructed Marco as sunrise broke over Rome, their improvised show nonetheless jogging, retaining the attention of something that shouldn't exist but did. "We can't simply undertaking photos for all time. Finally, they will want fact again." "What if we supply them a specific kind of reality?" Marco recommended. "Digital truth, whole immersive simulations. They may be now not bodily, they are informational entities. Perhaps they could enjoy virtual spectacles as though they had been actual." It turned into radical, unprecedented, probably insane. But over the subsequent months, Isabella's crew worked with generation companies, VR developers, AI programmers. They created a system that could interface with the informational substance that comprised the everlasting target audience, may want to feed them simulated spectacles that their non-bodily paperwork might revel in as genuine. gladiatorial fight without a real gladiators, beast hunts and not using a real beasts, executions without actual deaths. It all rendered in best detail, played out in virtual area that the eternal audience could observe with the equal intensity they'd once watched actual violence. The system went stay at the anniversary of the Colosseum's dedication, a symbolic gesture that the everlasting target audience appeared to comprehend. The informational shape that crammed the area started out interacting with the simulation, the 50,000 eternal observers focusing their collective attention on digital spectacles in place of demanding actual ones. Tourism lower back to the Colosseum. Humans ought to visit once more, stroll through the ancient monument, see the place in which gladiators had fought. Most in no way knew about the invisible audience, approximately the eternal observers who nonetheless stuffed the stands of their informational theater, about the digital spectacles gambling continuously to satisfy their want for violence and demise. However, Isabella knew. She maintained the system, updated the simulations, ensured the everlasting target market remained entertained. It changed into odd work, maintaining humanity's darkest leisure traditions in digital shape to satisfy ghosts of collective interest that had executed everlasting life through centuries of targeted commentary. Every now and then, she puzzled what might happen if the gadget failed, if the simulations stopped walking, if the everlasting target audience once again demanded actual spectacle. Would they summon new gladiators? Might contemporary people find themselves compelled to fight within the area, to die for the leisure of observers who'd been ready 15 centuries for the video games to renew? She didn't need to discover. So she maintained the digital spectacles, stored the everlasting target audience satisfied, preserved the compromise between their want for entertainment and humanity's horror at what had once entertained them. The Colosseum stood above Rome, historical and iconic, hiding its secret. The eternal target market watched their virtual video games, happy for now. And Isabella stored vigil over the gadget that averted records' darkest traditions from manifesting once more. Some monuments held reminiscences, some held ghosts. The Colosseum held something stranger, an audience that had watched so intensely, so collectively, for so many centuries that their attention had come to be permanent, had created a shape that could exist as long as the Colosseum stood. And they might always want spectacle, usually crave leisure, usually demand something to look at. Isabella had simply discovered a manner to present it to them without repeating records' violence. For now. However, she knew, and the eternal target market knew, that the compromise become fragile. That the historic hunger for blood sports activities wasn't honestly glad with the aid of simulations, simply briefly appeased. That in the future, come what may, the eternal target market would possibly find a manner to break through the virtual barrier and demand actual spectacle all over again. Till then, Isabella maintained her vigil, stored the simulations walking, ensured the eternal audience had something to observe that wasn't the death of living humans. It wasn't a great solution. However, in a world wherein collective interest could attain permanent lifestyles, in which monuments should hold the ghosts of millions of observers, wherein the past could call for participation from the present, it became the great solution humanity had. The Colosseum's blood-soaked legacy continued, no longer in truth but in virtual space, not with actual deaths but simulated ones, now not to meet living spectators, but to placate the eternal audience that had been watching for 2,000 years and might watch for 2,000 extra. And Isabella Rossi stood between past and present, between the eternal target market's hunger and humanity's safety, keeping the system that avoided Rome's darkest traditions from returning. Some guardians included monuments from time and climate. Isabella included humanity from a monument whose audience had in no way left, had in no way stopped looking, had in no way stopped yearning the spectacle of blood and demise that had described Rome's finest arena for 4 bloody centuries. The eternal target market watched their virtual games, and Isabella watched the everlasting audience, and countless cycle of statement and amusement playing out within the shadow of Records' most famous monument to humanity's love of looking others die.